Now we're going to talk about codominance. So what is codominance? Here's our main trunk, our leader, our main stem. You call it lots of different things. And you get up to here and it splits in three different directions. And all of these are roughly the same size. They're equal in size to each other, or at least 50% of the size of each other, which means they're codominant. What this also means is you have a weakness right here in the trunk. And sooner or later, with wind, with ice, with snow, one or more of these are going to fail. So you have to do something. First, you have to decide which one of these is the leader. Which one do you want as the leader? Because you're either going to take off or reduce the other two. And usually you pick the one that's straightest up. Not always. There may be some reason why you decide that you want to keep this one or this one. And let's say you took off both of these right here. This branch eventually will straighten up. Probably not all the way, but it'll straighten up quite a bit. So you pick the one that looks like it's got the best long-term potential for survival. And the other two, you're going to do something with. You could remove them, but there are some other options too. Here's why, and then we'll talk about your options. So here's codominance low on a trunk. And you can see included bark here, they're not well connected. And as this tree gets bigger, and again, you get wind or whatever, it is reasonably possible that this is what's going to happen. It's just going to split. Now you've lost the whole tree. So your option to that would be to do something about one or the other of these before this happens. And this is too bad. This is a pretty walnut tree, and it went bye-bye. And here's codominance higher up. You're at a second floor level, so this is 20 feet off the ground, and you're not going to be able to do anything about that. You'd have to hire an arborist. But here's what's reasonably likely to happen in the future is it's going to split. And notice the length of this split here. That much of the side of the trunk is exposed. That's a really big wound to the tree, and it's reasonably likely the tree will not be able to survive it. And this is actually in a park. That's a baseball field over there, one over here. These are bleachers. You probably wouldn't even be able to leave it up because you couldn't take the risk that it's going to come down sometime. So you lose the whole tree. So when it comes to codominance, there's a little mantra that you can have in your mind as you're approaching a tree to prune it. And that is, you're looking at it as you're walking up to it and you say, where's the leader? And where's the competition? And how am I going to deal with the competition? So that's kind of a routine thing that you're thinking about as you approach a tree to prune it. And you have a couple of options. You could remove in its entirety, with a removal cut. Let's say you've got two of these, trunk comes up and then splits. You make a decision that I want this one to be the leader, and I'm going to do something about this one. So removal is one option. You take the whole thing out. But you have a second option in some cases, which is either you do a reduction cut on it, or you do reduction and some thinning. You take some of the side branches off the branch that you've decided to, not make the leader. You want this one to no longer be dominant. The issue with it really is that you have to take a lot off a branch that's exhibiting codominance so that it gets the message, I'm no longer in competition to be the leader. We'll kind of go through a scenario here. We have a tree that has codominance here and here. This is the one you'd obviously pick to be your leader because it has the most continuous line from the base of the tree all the way up. But these two are competing with it. And notice that this one starts way down here. It's a pretty big branch. This one starts about midway, pretty big branch. You probably are not going to be able to remove them. They're too big. So you look at suppression. Suppression being maybe doing some reduction cuts on these, maybe combining that with some thinning where you take off some of the side branching as well as doing some reduction. So let's see. The first thing that you'd do is you'd say, where's the leader? And you'd say, there's the leader. And then you'd say, let's look at A here and say, what am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about the competition? And you could do reduction cuts. And you could make one up here. You could make one here at this junction. You could make one way down here. And what you have in mind there as to where you choose to make your reduction cut is how much am I going to have to take off to get down to removing 50 to 80% of it. And let's say you made the cut at the top there. This is what would be left. You would have taken off this. And obviously you haven't taken off anywhere near 50 to 80%. So if you had made your cut the next level down, you'd have taken off all of this. And now you're maybe up to 30% or so. Still haven't taken off enough. So you'd have to make a cut here. But you're still leaving pretty good structure. You've got all this bottom portion of the branch, and it has some good side branching. This branch is still intact. This is intact. So that's probably where you'd have to do it. Now, if it was your own tree in your own yard, you could one season make this cut up here, and then come back the next year and make the cut here, and then come back the third year and make this cut. So you can do it over time. But if you're not going to see that tree again, if we were out pruning with tree stewards and we didn't know when we were going to see this tree again, we'd have made the cut here. Now, C's a little bit different. You wouldn't want to cut that way down here because you simply wouldn't leave enough of it. You'd probably cut it here, and you'd probably take this and this off, and you might take do a little bit of thinning here and here on the lower part of the branch, just because you're trying to get up to 50 to 80%. So that's codominance, and the only way you're going to learn codominance is to go out and look at trees and think about how you're going to deal with them. And we'll be doing this with you when we have our field activity, which will be coming up next. But it's so much easier to do this when the tree is really little. Just a little snip, and you remove codominance here. You can see this one's over 50% of the size of this one. Snip, problem over. And you can have codominance anywhere on the tree, basically. Here's a lateral branch. This isn't a lead. And you can see it's coming up this way, and that's your leader. But look at this. So this branch is equal in size to this. And these two branches are equal in size to this. So you'd need to be doing some work here. And if I were doing this branch and was going to see it again, I would take this off first. And then I'd see what's happening up here with these. I might do reduction cuts on these two, but I would want to keep this as the lead. And that one's got to go. It's just, there's definite structural weakness here and here. So you can see codominance pretty much anywhere. But you don't see a ton of it. That's the good news. And sometimes it's species specific. Red maples are a mess. They're just the bane of pruners. They grow wherever they want to grow and however they want to grow. A lot of surface roots. And it's okay. It's its growth habit. That is what its growth habit is. So you have to live with it. You'll probably do some pruning cuts on them because there are some situations that are just untenable. But the good side of a red maple is that it's a survivor. It's a tough tree. I mean, it's being used a lot for parking lot trees. When you look at trees in a parking lot, a new parking lot that's been created, you're very likely to be seeing red maple being planted on the islands between the parking spaces because it's a tough tree. So we've been looking at what kinds of things have to be cut. Now we're going to switch to some science here. We have to figure out where to make the cut. And the way that the tree responds to a pruning cut or any other kind of injury or trauma tells us where to make the cut. So let's take a look at this. So how do trees respond to wounds, whether it's a pruning cut or a natural break? And they don't use Band-Aids. And most of what we know is the result of the research of this gentleman, whose name is Alex Shigo. He's referred to as the father of modern arboristry. And you see him here in the process of, he has a downed tree and he's cutting it up. And he did 15,000 of these tree dissections to try to figure out how do trees respond to an injury. And one of his quotes is pretty good. He says, pruning is one of the best things an arborist can do for a tree, but one of the worst things we can do to a tree. Because basically, pruning wounds the tree. We're deliberately injuring the tree when we make a pruning cut. So we need to understand how trees respond to injury. We need to recognize that any pruning cut we make on a tree is going to allow some decay to get in. And we need to make our pruning cuts in a way that we're going to minimize impact, speed closure, allow the tree to seal off that injury. And that really requires us to make the cut in the right place. And to figure out the right place, we have to understand the process called CODIT. CODIT stands for compartmentalization of decay in trees. And this is what Shigo figured out. Trees aren't like the human body. If we get an injury, we heal. Trees don't heal, they seal. That is, they seal off the interior part of the tree just inside of where a pruning cut or a break occurs. And they seal off, and they do that chemically, by the way. They issue chemicals inside the tree to try to. And on the outside of the tree, they create a physical barrier to the entry of the kinds of things that can cause decay. So they're trying to seal off the injury area to keep pathogens, fungi, moisture, insects, anything that can either cause decay or facilitate decay from getting into the tree. So in the process, you have a chemical process occurring inside the tree where it's trying to wall off or compartmentalize the wound area so that bad stuff can't get into the interior of the tree. And this sealing process takes place, as I mentioned, both inside the tree and what they call the reaction zone, and outside the tree in what's called the barrier zone, and we'll look at that. Okay, so here we're looking at a tree cookie, and let's assume that we did a pruning cut right here. So we took a branch off here. Now that's an entry point for decay to get into the tree. So as soon as you make that cut, the tree starts a chemical reaction just inside the wound in this area here. If you made your cut here, it would be just in this area here, where chemicals are released to try to create blockages against the entry of decay causing agents. So these little dots here are your vascular tissue, your phloem and xylem. And the ones on the inside of the tree are no longer active. That's heartwood, no action there. But the ones just inside the bark are where you're getting your movement up and down. So the tree's going to secrete chemicals into these tubes just above where the damage occurred and just below it, so that you can't have movement up and down that would transfer the decay. The second walling off through chemical release is going to occur in the first tree ring inside where the damaged area is. So if we made our cut here, this ring right here, you'd see chemicals being released to try to keep decay causing elements from going in laterally into the center of the tree, into here. And the third place would be in these are called rays. And rays are kind of like vascular tissue tubes that go laterally into the center of the tree. And for, let's say the damage is here, maybe this ray, this ray, this ray, they would be blocked off by the release of chemicals that clog those passages so nothing can get through it. So I don't know if you know what rays are all about. Rays are used to move the waste products, basically, of the chemical reactions that take place inside the tree into the center of the tree. So, the roots are taking up water and nutrients, and those nutrients are in many cases minerals, iron, phosphorus, and so on. Chemical reactions take place, you end up with end products that the tree doesn't need, and it shuffles them off into the center of the tree through the rays. And that's one of the reasons why your tree wood at the center of the tree is very hard, is because it has a lot of minerals in it. Okay, so those are your three chemical walls that are formed inside the tree at the point of just inside a cut in order to block the movement of decay causing agents. But the one that's really going to seal it off takes place outside the tree. So here's our pruning cut, and you can see that there's new wood forming around the cut, trying to wrap around it and cover it over. This wood is called wound wood. So let's look at kind of a time sequence here. We've just made the pruning cut. Here we are a year later, the wound wood is being formed, and 2 years later, it's completely sealed off. Now, not every tree can completely seal it off in a 2-year stretch. Sometimes it takes longer. Some trees are very fast at this, some are slower. But after a few years, you don't even notice that there was a branch there. This is what it looks like a few years later, and a couple more years, and it's just going to look like this. You're not going to see it anymore. New wood has been added around it every year, and new bark, and they disappear. And this stuff, pruning sealer, has been shown to be ineffective. It doesn't work. We used to paint wounds, thinking that we didn't know that the tree had its own mechanism for sealing off. So we tried to seal them. This doesn't work. Don't do it. All right. So what? I guess is the question here. What is the significance of coat it? Well, it tells us where to make our removal cuts. When we're going to cut a branch off in its entirety, it tells us where to make the cut. And you're going to make it where the tree is going to have the best chance of creating that fourth wall, that wound wood creation area. And it's just outside a feature called the branch bark collar, which is easier just to show. Here's a trunk or a main branch and a branch coming off it. And you'll notice as you come inward on this branch, the branch is, nice, clear, parallel lines until you get right to here. And you can see it bends upwards here, and it kind of moves outward here. This whole area is kind of swollen. And the reason it appears swollen is because there are 2 layers of wood here. The branch itself is creating new wood every year, but also what it's growing from, the secondary branch or the trunk, is also creating new wood here. And it does that primarily to make this junction very, very strong. So every year you get a new layer of wood from the branch, a new layer of wood from what it's growing from. And you get layer after layer after layer after layer. So that's why it appears larger here, because it is larger, it is thicker, it has more wood, and that makes your branch really strong. But the other thing about it is, this is the portion of the tree that's going to generate that new growth that's going to create the wound wood that's going to seal off a wound if you do a pruning cut here. So you can see pretty clearly just by glancing at this that the branch bark collar ends right here. That's where you're going to make your pruning cut for a removal cut. So here's a crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtles have very obvious branch bark collars. You can see it's the swollen area where you have double wood, and you'd make your cut just outside it, right there. Okay. You do not want to cut into it. If you cut into it, you're going to reduce its ability to create that wound wood and seal it off against entry of decay-causing agents. With this tree, it's a little bit harder to see, but you can see the branch comes in nice and straight and then swoops up right here and swoops down here. That's branch bark collar. You want to cut just outside it. Same thing here. You can see where it comes up and where it comes down here. That's showing you where the branch bark collar is. You want to cut just outside it. So that's the whole significance of the branch bark collar. And this is a pretty interesting photo that I found on the net. This is a perfect cut. This is a perfect pruning cut. You can see the swollen area of the branch bark collar. They cut just outside it. Perfect. But then there's this. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what happened here. They cut off the whole branch bark collar. This is called a flush cut. And actually, they kept cutting right through. Obviously, they're using a chainsaw and gouged right into the trunk. So I'm picturing the cutter being up there, and they're on a ladder, and somebody kicks the ladder out from under them, and they just go shoot, chop the thing up, or maybe they sneezed. I don't know what happened. That's the way they should have made the cut. That's the way they made the cut. And it used to be in the field of arboristry that flush cuts were made routinely, because if you look at the tree from the side and you've made a flush cut, you don't have that bump of the branch bark collar sticking out. So appearance wise, aesthetically, it looks better. But they didn't realize at the time that they were removing the part of the tree that's going to seal it. And this is what happens. So a flush cut was made on this is a cherry tree, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. And you can see there's some wound wood here, but they'd taken off so much of the branch bark collar that it couldn't generate enough wound wood to seal it off. And you can look right in. You can see the decay has gotten in and eaten out a whole section of the interior of the tree. So if you want to look for a place where a tree might fail, there's one right there. So don't make flush cuts.